Welcome to Payment Matters. I'm your host, Jeff Lin. Thanks for tuning in today. On this show, we talk about the ever-changing landscape of healthcare payments and the impacts to healthcare payers, providers, and consumers. You can follow the conversation on Twitter at hashtag Payment Matters and follow me at Jeff B. Lin. For today's show, we're discussing the importance of omni-channel security for healthcare organizations and making sure payment data is protected at every point. We've talked about the importance of payment security and compliance on prior shows. Really, one aspect of that is really looking at one key channel tied to that is the call center and how they're actually accepting these payments. And for really today's show, we're really going to dive deep into that. We're going to learn about what risks are present in call centers and really what healthcare organizations should be doing to protect themselves against the broad-based hackers and nefarious people that are out there. For this discussion, I'm happily joined by Alan Watson from Semafone. Alan, really glad to have you on today's show. For the listeners out there, could you introduce yourself and talk about your background?
Hi, good afternoon, Jeff. Yes, of course, Alan Watson. So I'm the Director of Sales Engineering at Semafone. So I've been working in contact centers in the US and Europe for about the last 20 years. And for the last 6 of those, working with Semafone, who specialize in collecting sensitive information, such as payment data, through the voice channel, in particular through contact centers.
Great. And once again, great to have you on today's call. So let's kind of jump right into it and talk about call centers and really what's the risk? How should healthcare organizations be looking at the risk of accepting payments through their call center? And for our listeners, this would be an important refresher on how important credit card data is being accepted there. Can you explain that?
Yeah, sure. So healthcare, like many verticals, still use contact centers widely because it's a great way to establish a relationship with the consumers, with the end customers. Having that human touch is extremely important. And when you're talking to your end customers, your consumers and clients, you want to be able to help them out in any situation that they might need assistance. So if during that conversation a payment is required, you don't want to have to forward that caller off to somewhere else. You don't want to have to direct them to a website. For that relationship, for that customer journey to be as positive as possible, you want to be able to deal with those interactions in real time. So you want to be able to empower the contact center agents, the customer relationship managers, to be able to deal with all of these scenarios while talking live with the end customer, with the clients. And that means inevitably they're going to end up taking payments in some scenarios. The easiest way to take a payment over the phone is to use a credit card. It's been done for many years. Customers are used to it. It's a well-acknowledged way of making a payment while on a telephone call. But once that payment data is read out, once an end customer has verbalized that information and passed it on to a contact center agent over the phone, unfortunately, that data has now touched all sorts of things. So as well as the obvious agent themselves, who has now heard that credit card number, it's also passed through all the infrastructure that supports the contact center. Potentially it's being captured on call recordings. So now you have this personal information, which is obviously very sensitive, and the customers are assuming that you're going to treat it securely and with the respect it deserves. And now you have to secure all of those elements within the contact center in order to protect that information on behalf of the end customers.
Yeah, it's interesting. So is this a thing that's changed or shifted over the past 5 or 10 years, or is this a new phenomenon? Because I imagine 10, 20 years ago, people were accepting payments over the phone across multiple call centers across all organizations. What's changed to make this a much more important thing today than it was before? And I guess what increased the risk?
So you're absolutely right. Credit cards have been taken over the phone for a long time, since credit cards have been around pretty much. Where the changes have occurred is that there used to be easier ways to steal credit cards. So before you had things like chip and pin, ENB, you used to have methods of taking credit card data through cloning and card present transactions online through various methods. So there used to be easier ways to steal credit cards, and over time those have been slowly locked out. Things like chip and pin for using credit cards when you have it on you as a card present transaction. E-commerce, so online payments, have become secured with encryption and all sorts of different tools. So over time, it's become harder and harder to steal credit cards in other areas. But through voice channel, through contact center, historically that has lagged behind. So as the fraudsters and the criminals out there have been turned away from stealing credit cards in other areas, they have begun to focus their attention more onto those card not present transactions which still remain, such as contact centers. So they have become targets over the last 5 years in particular, as it has become more difficult to steal credit card data in other areas.
Got it. It sounds like the threats are increasing across the board. What's your thoughts here? And we've heard before, which is there's definitely external threats, but also inside threats. As you look at this, kind of what's your viewpoint, or kind of what should healthcare organizations know about insider threats that could compromise their security?
Yep, you're absolutely right. There are external and internal threats, and a lot of organizations tend to focus on the external threats first. So they're worried about hackers breaking into the network and taking data. That tends to be the focus. But with a contact center, in particular a contact center over other areas of a business, there's a lot of people around who have access to that data. And unfortunately, that does expose organizations to internal threats as well. Some of that is just very opportunistic. So you may simply have someone who has credit card data in front of them, and maybe on the spur of the moment decides to do something they shouldn't with that data. So you always have that risk. Unfortunately, though, you do also have contact center agents who, for one reason or another, start to do that systematically. You may have a disgruntled employee who's about to leave an organization. You have issues there. You can have home workers or potentially external third-party contact centers that might be leveraged by an organization where you have less direct control over the individuals involved. Those can pose risks as well. And organizations that use things like home workers as part of their contact center infrastructure, it is very difficult to secure a home environment if you're using that kind of work at home agent as part of your contact center resource. And unfortunately, there are documented cases as well of the agents themselves becoming targets. So either through bribery or potentially even blackmail and threats. If an organization, a criminal organization, knows that a contact center agent has ready access to sensitive information, including credit card data, but also social security numbers, date of birth, etc., etc., they themselves can actually become targets as hackers and fraudsters attempt to get access into those organizations.
Got it. Yeah, and clearly there's a lot of, I call it, opportunities for this type of theft or compromises in they call it the security of the data that's being processed here, and clearly lots of sensitive information is being transferred. For the listeners out there, why should organizations care as they think about this with kind of fraudulent employees or hackers targeting them? To many, this may happen very infrequently. So why should a healthcare organization really care about this and put some energy and focus into it?
I think there's a few different reasons. One is if you do suffer a breach and the evidence points towards the contact center as the area at fault where the data was removed from. There are forensic investigations that then occur to get to the bottom of what happened. Those are expensive and time consuming. So there are good financial reasons why you don't want a contact center to be the source of a breach. There are drawn out investigations that occur after a breach, which can be very distracting and costly. But probably the biggest reason is that in this day and age, we constantly see on the news organizations that have been breached, hotel chains and card companies, et cetera, and the brand damage that occurs when you see organizations' name on the news as being the source of a major data breach. That brand damage is significant. And it outweighs any financial cost that might come directly from the breach itself. That can be a long-lasting representational damage, which is very difficult to repair.
Got it. Yeah, it's funny. Even my own personal experience when I had my my first child. We got a letter in the mail when he was 6 months old. That is his information was breached. Or was part of a data breach, and it's amazing how things have changed so fast, and how well the hackers have been able to get there, either internal or external. So it sounds like there's definitely some major threats out there, and I'll call it the reputational brand impacts are great. So what should healthcare organizations be doing to protect against these threats? What are the options or solutions out there?
Well, there's a few things to have a look at, but I think the most important thing to bear in mind is the concept is referred to as privacy by design. So it's having a look at the processes, the people, the technology involved when talking to end customers. And it's inevitable, especially in healthcare, that you're going to have to discuss and swap sensitive information. So people's social security numbers, medical records, dates of birth, account numbers, credit card details, which is what we're focusing on today. That information is going to be part of that conversation. There's no way around it. So realizing that's going to be the case, you then need to have a look at only having that information exchanged and recorded where it's absolutely necessary. So you don't want information crossing networks and being stored and captured on call recordings, etc., where there is no benefit. You want to make sure that you're taking that personal information which your customers are entrusting you with, and you're only using it for the purpose that they're giving it to you. So if you take a simple example like a credit card, there is no reason to have a credit card number captured in a call recording. It is of no benefit to anybody that it's sitting in a call recording. So you want to make sure that the credit card is used to take a payment, but there is no lasting record of it in call recordings or other areas where it's absolutely giving no benefit to anybody. So the best overriding principle is to only use the information in the way that it's been intended, and not to have it lying around anywhere else where it's not giving any kind of functional benefit. So for a company like Semafone, the way that we go about it is to capture that data before it gets to the contact center, do the transaction so that the payment is taken, but actually the contact center agent, the call recordings, and the entire environment is not actually exposed to that credit card information at all. It is purely used to do the payment transaction, but it is never stored, it is never visible to a contact center agent. And that's an overriding principle which can be applied to all sensitive information, is just to make sure that you're only using it the way that it was intended when the end customer gave it to you, and that you are not storing it or keeping it anywhere. So if you are breached, whether it's an internal or an external threat, and there is a data breach, that there is no data there to be taken. You have minimized any personal information that you may have on record, so that should that breach occur, you have minimized any exposure, preferably right down to zero, because you're not storing the personal information which was being targeted.
Got it. And for the listeners out there, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to Payment Matters. I'm joined by Alan Watson, and we're talking about payment security in your call center. So you talked about, the importance of payments and only using the data as intended. And one thing that we've had discussions in the past is there is a balance tied to security and experience. Right? So if you provide the ultimate positive consumer experience, does that potentially negate security? And also, if you create highly secure, restrictive environments, does that impact the consumer experience? And so as I'm listening in here and listening into all these solutions, especially how you approach your solutions here in terms of the call center staff and also the consumer on the other end, how do you balance that? How do you make sure that the consumer experience is really top notch and you're not slowing things down by twice the time now it takes to process a payment or collect that payment? How do you approach that?
I think one of the main things is that if you've been contacted by an end customer, is that you try to answer their request, assist them with the reason that they called you, within the same format that they contacted you. So if a customer phones you up in order to make a payment or make an inquiry, you want to complete that entire conversation on that telephone call. If someone contacted you via web chat, you want to do the whole thing via web chat. It's avoiding having to redirect a customer to a different channel in order to complete the reason that they contacted you. So if they called you up and they need to make a payment, you want to take the payment on a telephone call rather than redirect them and have a negative impact on that customer journey, on their experience. So when you decide that that's going to be your primary goal, you then have to look at what information you need to take off the customer on that call. And what we're focusing on here is the payments. So credit card details and information covered by PCI DSS, which is the security controls from the payment card industry that's applied to credit card data. So when you have a look at that, you then need to see how you can capture and use that data while on that telephone call, and securing it as much as is humanly possible. And in the case of something like card data, the approach which has become very popular and is becoming the default way of doing it is something called DTMF, capture and masking. So DTMF is just the tones on the line. So as you dial digits into your telephone handsets and then it creates tones, those tones can be captured by a solution like Semafone. So you can actually have an end customer type their credit card details directly into their telephone handset rather than read it out to a contact center agent. And by doing that, those credit card numbers can be captured directly without the contact center agents or the call center call recordings or anything else being exposed to that information. So that enables you to take a payment, complete the transaction, to do it while the customer is live on the telephone call. So again, you're not redirecting them to another channel. You're answering their request in the format that they chose, but to do it in such a way that that data is not being stored anywhere beyond the duration of the telephone call, so that it's only being used for the purpose that the customer was sharing it with you.
Got it. And DTMF, I call it just the dial tones, right, that I'm typing into the phone to process a payment. I recall back in the days, back in the old phone hackers that out there, they would actually be able to record the tone to find out what numbers were being pressed. In the Semafone solution, is that something that you don't expose either or record to the end user or to any call recording?
That's correct. So Semafone is always the first thing the telephone call interacts with. So the Semafone solution takes that data off the telephone line before it's passed on to the contact center. That can be done on premises, but actually a very good way of doing it is to do it through a cloud solution. So we can do that before the call is ever even delivered down to the contact center. So that way, the data expressed as tones is captured by Semafone within our secure environments, and it is done before the call is ever delivered to the contact center itself. That way, if someone does gain access to that network and things like voice over IP and those modern technologies are in use, there is no longer any data being transmitted there. So any fraudster or hacker that does gain access to that network is going to be disappointed, because they're only going to find a series of zeros or ones, because all of that data has been securely captured and processed within the Semafone solution before the call was delivered.
Got it. And clearly you've been involved in this company and these solutions, working with what type of customers do you normally work with? And can you describe any experience you've had with healthcare organizations, and really why what's been their experience with Semafone and your solution?
Absolutely. So Semafone works globally. Lots of customers in the US, Canada, and Europe, but as far afield as Australia. Every vertical that takes credit card numbers over the phone leverages the solution. But we do have a lot of healthcare customers. And the reason I think healthcare in particular appreciates a solution like this is because, as we said earlier, it's inevitable they are going to have to touch customers' sensitive information. It is such a core part of what is being done within that contact center. It's unavoidable that that information is going to be exchanged and used during those conversations. So knowing that is the case, it then becomes a matter of how to secure that information and use it correctly during those conversations with the end customers. And that's where it becomes quite difficult in contact centers to lock everything down and secure everything. So finding an approach where you're able to do everything you need to do, but not come into direct contact with that sensitive information is really what the healthcare industry is looking for. That they can do everything they need to do, they can do it in real time with their end customers, with a great customer journey, but they don't have to expose themselves to that sensitive information that they don't need to store going forward.
Got it. That's helpful for the listeners here. One thing, as I was thinking through this, there's healthcare organizations at large and small, from the single doc practices to the large health systems to even payers and health plans who have to have call centers. And so for those organizations that are smaller, that don't have a call center, but they still need to accept payments, either over the phone, online, point of sale. What's your recommendation or advice to those organizations that are small? They don't have an outsourced call center. What things can they be thinking about? What things should they be doing?
Well, for the smaller sized organizations, that's really where the cloud-based solutions come into their own. So for large enterprise, multinational organizations, on-premises solutions have a very good place to be. But for smaller organizations, a cloud-based solution can offer a very cost-effective and easily managed answer to many requirements. So I think for a smaller organization, I would definitely think about attempting to leverage a cloud-based solution. So to have a look at how telephone calls might be routed through a secure capture service prior to reaching their own premises and their own equipment. That does offer certainly an easily consumable service at a price point which is more appropriate to smaller contact centers, or indeed, as you say, to organizations that may not have a formal contact center.
Got it. Well, Alan, this was extremely helpful and insightful, really, to think about contact centers and these call centers and how they need to be accepting payments in the most secure methods and ways possible. And I think you highlight really the positives of the experience and also driving great security for them as well. So for those listeners, these are the payment matters really tackling today. And I want to thank Alan Watson for joining me today. So if our listeners want to learn more about you or Semafone, how can they find you?
Well, probably the easiest way is to have a look at our website, so semafone.com. On there, you will find some good information about the solution. You will find animations and videos that explain in more depth what Semafone does and how we do it. You'll also find some good customer testimonials on there as to how other healthcare organizations have leveraged this solution and the kind of experiences they've had. So if you're looking for further information and you're interested to have a look at what we've done elsewhere, semafone.com, that would definitely be the first point of call.
Great. Well, thank you once again, Alan. And thank you to all for listening in today. Remember that you can listen in to these episodes weekdays at 4:30 a.m., 12:30 p.m., and 8:30 p.m. Eastern. If you have a comment about this episode or the show, follow hashtag Payment Matters or connect with me on Twitter at Jeff Lin. You can learn more about my show at HealthcareNOW Radio or at instamed.com. Until next time, I'm Jeff Lin. Thank you.